Toss aside the touchy-feely notions of love in business and recognize the real power it holds. Welcome to the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast with host Steve Farber. Drawing on his work with a wide variety of companies from the Fortune 100 to smaller family-owned businesses, Farber shares inspiring interviews with business leaders and proven strategies for how you can create experiences that your customers will love by developing a culture that your employees, teammates, and colleagues love working in. Discover why and how love, at the end of the day, is just damn good business for you too. Here's your host, Steve Farber.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. I am your host, Steve Farber, and boy, oh boy, do I have a treat for you today. My guest is the one and only Pat Lencioni, who is a rock star business author. You may be familiar with Pat as the author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which was his breakout book, and he's written 12 best-selling business books. Actually, a couple of them were family books, too, as you will hear. He's sold over 6 million copies. He's got a couple of books that are perennial bestsellers, very much in demand as a speaker. And his company, The Table Group, works with Fortune 500 companies, and they do phenomenal work. He is also, as you will hear in this interview, an old friend of mine. And in fact, once upon a time, Pat Lencioni was a client of mine, way back in the mid-90s. He's an amazing guy. Our conversation spanned subjects far and wide, from the current state of affairs in the COVID-19 situation, all the way to the creative process, to a discussion about family, to what it means to be a leader, and why some people should perhaps choose not to lead. It's a great conversation. I know you'll have a lot of fun joining us in it. Here you go, my interview with Pat Lencioni. Enjoy. Hey, Pat, thanks for being with me today. It's great to see you again, man.
I know, it's been way too long, Steve.
So I want to start with just a quick review of our connection, and I'll tell you the story the way I remember it, and then you tell me the story the way you remember it. I remember it started way back. I'm going to say around 1994, 95, somewhere in that ballpark. Because I was relatively new at the Tom Peters Company, and I started there in 1994. You at the time were at Sybase.
Yep.
And you guys hired us to come in and do some leadership training for the folks at Sybase. So you actually were my client.
That's right. My wife and I, Laura, were just talking about this. We had been married 2 years. She remembers you. And I remember we saw you and I said, I want you guys to be like him. We want more of him. And you know, Steve, you had a big impact on my career because, you know, I remember watching you and thinking, I like what he does and how he does it. And I did not know that I would ever be doing speaking and the kind of things I'm doing now. But you know, you see people early in your life and they're role models for you and they do things well. And you think, oh, maybe someday I could do something like that. So that was a big part of my early formation in this. And I remember it just like you do. We did these leadership classes. It was called film.
Oh, and, yeah.
Remember?
Right. Yes.
And
yes.
We were doing leadership development. And
what did film stand for?
The Fibonacci Institute of Leadership and Management.
Right.
Fibonacci was the logo of the company. You know,
right.
Fibonacci
right.
curve.
Yeah, it was that Nautilus shell.
Yeah.
Which was the part of the Sybase logo. Yeah.
Right.
And here's what I remember about that. So it was global, right? So we ran a series of workshops for Sybase folks from all around the world.
Yep.
So I remember two things. One was we couldn't go too fast in terms of pace.
Right. Because of language.
Speech. But we had to go really fast in terms of content.
Yeah.
No dwelling and a low corn factor.
Yeah.
What you used to say.
You remember it well.
No corniness. These people want straightforward, and you and I actually co-facilitated a good number of those.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it was fun. Who knew what we were getting into, and what we'd go on to do. But and I remember the story that you told about your son. Was it $11? How many bucks was it?
No, oh my gosh. Yeah, $12 check.
The $12 check. Yeah, you're like.
Yeah, so just so we're not leaving people behind in this conversation. So first of all, this was back in the days where there were checks.
Right.
I mean, there still are, but yeah. So what was the story? The context was.
Was it Saul or Jeremy?
It was Jeremy. Yeah,
Jeremy.
It was Jeremy, the youngest, my youngest, and the context was around doing what you say you will do.
Right, and him walking by you. I remember it now. Yeah.
And I had told him that I was going to write a $12 check that he can send in to like this mail order catalog or something like that. I said, I'm going to write you that check. And I kept forgetting, and he kept asking, and I kept forgetting. And then one day he just walked by me. And his little voice walked by saying, $12 check, $12 check, $12 check. And all the guilt came crashing down on my head. And I wrote him that check. And that was, I can't believe you remember that. That's crazy.
Oh gosh.
It's been a while since I've told that story.
Yeah. And how much of leadership do we learn reinforced or even new things from having been parents?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's interesting because those days for me were really formative days because, that film program for Sybase was rooted in Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner's work.
Yeah.
Right, the credibility stuff and leadership challenge.
Yep.
And of course, Jim was the president of the Tom Peters Company at the time, my most significant mentor. And, his work really deeply informs my work.
Yeah.
And that's where I was really learning it, was by helping, folks like your team, not just understand these ideas, but begin to practice them. And those were really significant days for me. And I remember seeing you. I mean, you're always a natural in front of the room. It sounds almost ridiculous to say it now, but I remember watching you and just kind of seeing you light up and the fun that we had around it. And so I remember when that spark kind of lit into a fire for you.
Yeah.
And let me just say it this way. And now look at you. I mean, really.
You know what's funny? You know what's funny, Steve? When I look back, I never really was planning a future. I always loved whatever I was doing. And people often come to us. My company, the Table Group, have been around for almost 23 years now. And people say, how can we build a company like yours? We were like, I don't know, because in our first 2 years, we actually were fine doing what we did. We've always just loved wherever we were at. And we were never like thinking of the next thing. We're always, and boy, when you were doing training for us and I got to train with you, I was just like, this is the best. And so I never really kind of thought about where it would go. So Thank God it went where it went. I'm very happy now.
Well, yeah. And rightfully so. We travel in the same circles. I would think it's safe to say that your circles are quite a bit bigger than mine.
But I don't know about that. I mean,
but the thing is that, everywhere I go where I hear your name mentioned and, people, talk about your books or they heard you speak or whatever it might be. It always makes me feel great because, there are lots of different people in this industry as in any industry.
Yeah.
And there are some people who do well by assuming a persona and by creating something that they think people want to hear versus just being authentically who they are. And that's who you are. You've always been such an authentic, an authentic, what's the right word? I mean, obviously it's person, but
for better or worse,
but an authentic communicator, an authentic believer in people's capabilities to do great things. And so I'm just so happy for seeing what you've accomplished. Not only you, but you and your team, because your team, I knew your whole team because the original team, because that was the Sybase team.
Yeah.
And you guys basically walked down the street and hung out a shingle, same crew, and hit the ground running. It was fantastic.
Well, those are very nice things, what you said. I mean, they mean a lot. The authenticity and the try to be honest and the believing in the people around me. So that's just a wonderful thing for you to say. I really appreciate that. You know, one of the regrets I have, one of the difficult things is, I mean, and it's wonderful, but I hung that shingle up about the same day that my wife and I found out we were having twins. My boys are about to turn 22 next week.
Wow.
And so, but since I've started this business and we've been traveling and we've doing all this stuff, I have no time to do extra things, which I love because I'm very involved in my kids' lives. So people like you, if I see you when I'm on the road someplace in an airport or at a venue, that's about all I'm going to get. Right. Because I'm racing back home to, you know, for sports or youth group or school or team, you know, whatever else it is. And so my kids are just getting older and old enough that my wife can actually come do some things with me.
Oh,
and so maybe I'll get to reconnect with a lot of my, you know, old friends like you and so many others that I've just not had any time to indulge those relationships. Darn it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. And here's what I'll tell you from my experience as a parent, because, you know, the thread I want to pick up on again, you know, of how much we can learn about leadership from being parents, which is the thought that you kind of put out there just a few minutes ago. So I was a young parent when we first met.
Yeah.
I mean, relatively young, but I also started really young, right? I mean, I had 3 kids before I was 30 years old,
which was rare back then.
It was very rare back then, and I think it's even more rare.
Yeah,
less rarer. Is rarer a word? More rarer today.
It depends what part of the country you're in.
Yeah, right.
Because there's certain parts of the country where that happens more, and certain socioeconomic or cultural groups that do that. But living in major metropolitan areas, my wife and I got married when we were 27 and 25, and you'd thought I was 17 and she was 15. People are like, why are you getting married?
Yeah, exactly. So then, you know, 19 years ago, I married into 3 stepdaughters. And then one day, actually, Jeremy did the math on this. And he said, hey, Dad, do you realize that by the time Presley, my youngest stepdaughter, turns 20, you will have been raising teenagers for 25 straight years.
Oh, well, that's wild.
And it is true. His math was correct.
They raised you sharp.
25 years. They keep you sharp. And then, you know, I love teenagers. I think they're hilarious. And I love them for other reasons too, but that's probably the main one. And then, you know, they grow up and they become, you know, real live adult human beings. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing. So we're empty nesters here, but we love getting together with our kids. So you still have a couple at home.
Yeah.
And you still have that to look forward to. It's a different phase. Not that this is not great now, but there's something really cool when they all go off on their own. And you and your wife can look at each other and go like, hey, what do we want to do now? It's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, we are we're getting more and more time together, and it's great that I like her. I mean, and I love her, but it's great that I love spending time with her. But and during this shutdown that we're in right now, I have to say, like, I'll get off this call and I'll have another call in 15 minutes after we're done. And I will run around and find my kids and give every one of them a hug and do something fun, like just checking in with them. I'm loving this little time in that way.
Yeah.
You know, in between everything, I get to reconnect and stuff. And that's something I'm trying to treasure because I know it won't last forever.
Yeah. So I'd like to, let me build on that a little bit as we expand it out from, you know, the Pat and Farber story and look at the world at large for a moment, you know, in these current times, which some people are referring to as the new normal, which I take issue with.
I think it's the new abnormal.
It's the new abnormal, exactly. Because we tend to take the word normal and equate it with eternal, as in the new normal is the new eternal, as if it's going to be this reality forever. And it's not. It's just not. It is going to end, but there will be consequences, both good and bad. So what's your take on where we are now and what we should think about moving forward, you know, as human beings in general, but as business people in particular?
I love that you asked that, because I just wrote an article that I just shared with my team that's going to make its way into a podcast or an article or something. We're not really sure. But I talked about how after this, people are just now starting. I mean, the suffering is still going on, and God bless them. We got to pray for those people that are suffering. But I think we're all starting to go, okay, I think I see that there is a light down there, and we're going to emerge. I think people literally just right now are starting to go, okay, what's it going to be like to come out of this? And I don't want to go back to the old normal. I want to create a new normal, not the new abnormal, but the new normal. And there's a few things that I want to get rid of and not take with me into the next thing. I think this is a forward-looking thing. Like, the new thing hopefully will be better. And one of them is the idea of professionalism. And I think this is right up your line. I want to replace it with personalism. Like, I mean, I've always been involved in the lives of the people that I work with, but, not like I am right now. And I'm not going to go back to the professional distance of like, well, I know what your kids are doing, kind of, and all that. I'm going to lean so much harder into my people, because during this time, we've really become, ironically, more part of each other's lives, because we're sitting at home and they're, and doing this stuff and seeing one another's kids and missing each other. I'm not going to go back to the old, more regulated professionalism. Right. We are like family, and we're going to live into that. That's one thing. I don't want to go back and be professional after this. I want to be personal. Yeah. The other thing is, we have abandoned during this time, and I want to abandon this idea of over-engineering things. Like, oh, we have to take months and months to figure this out and polish this up and do this. We're like, screw it. Just put it out there. People understand. Just let them know. And we have been more productive and more satisfied and serving our clients better than we ever have, because we're just not doing all of those over-engineering process, wonkety things. Right. So that's another thing that I don't want to do. I'm also not going to get on an airplane unless I have to. Now, there's a lot of good reasons to get on airplanes. There's also a lot of reactive getting on airplanes that we do just because we're used to it. Right. And I'm going to use social media more. I'm going to use Zoom and things like this. I'm also just going to think more about the time I have with my family and with other close friends, and not be quite so quick to sacrifice that in order to fly to Saskatoon, Canada for a 20-minute meeting that I could have easily done another way.
Right. Yeah. Isn't it? It's kind of a wonderful irony that the physical distancing, the physical separation, is encouraging all of us to be more connected to each other, and in more personal ways, sitting in each other's living room or whatever, and having, it's suddenly it's okay to have kids crawling over your head when you're in the middle of a business meeting. There's a wonderful personalness to that versus the professionalism that would have made that just not okay.
Exactly.
Like 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, that was not okay. And now it's a part of our experience with each other. And I also think it's remarkable. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Obviously, that the core of my work for a long time has been that love is the foundation of leadership, and love is what creates great business and all of that.
And much as people might think that sounds like a cliche, it's just absolutely true. The L word, with every talk I give and every executive team I work with, it's like, if you're not loving the people you're with, you're not going to tell them the difficult news. You're not going to challenge them to grow. You're not going to. It's love. That's what makes Southwest Airlines great. They actually love each other.
Yeah, exactly. And there are many, many examples of that.
Oh,
and in my experience, the resistance to that idea, the knee-jerk resistance to that idea is really softening quite a bit, which is very cool.
I agree.
But what we're seeing now and I believe this is not an exaggeration, an unprecedented way, is the entire planet, literally, and as I'm fond of saying, literally is a word I use literally, the entire planet, we're all faced with the same challenge. And because we're all faced with the same challenge, our capacity to have empathy for each other is greater than it's ever been, because we can all relate to what we're all faced with. It's never been that way before.
No.
So not only are people connecting using the technology for Zoom, but the question how are you, is more genuine than it's ever been. And I have to believe that there's a good amount of this new level of compassion and empathy and love and connection that's going to continue when we get back to breathing the same oxygen with each other. What do you think?
I hope so. I was just talking to this with my team earlier today, because we're hanging out a lot more on Zoom and realizing that if we get too efficient, we're not going to be effective. So there needs to be more time to be together and talk about these things. And we were just talking about this, that my concern is that I think when this is over, and I mean like when we go back to we start working again and the kids are in school again. And I think that we're going to face some problems. And I think there's going to be a worldwide social depression. I don't mean economic, but I think people are going to get depressed because they're going to go back to the old way of doing things and recognize that that wasn't all that great, and that we have to go back and reclaim this new stuff that we have. And because I really worry about people going, oh, get me out of my house. Come on, I need to get to work. I need to do this. And they're going to go to work and they're going to go, this is it? This is what I thought I missed so much? And the good news is healthy, vibrant organizations where people love on each other and they have real relationships with each other and they pour into each other and pour into their customers and they get work done, they're going to be really glad to get back to work. But there's a lot of people who worked in really dysfunctional, cold companies that it's going to be super hard when this is over. And so hopefully we will push through it and really embrace organizational health and openness, because if we don't, we're going to experience some really depressed people.
So yeah, that's an interesting perspective. So I'm kind of projecting ahead and thinking, all right, so let's say I'm on a team that is now it's virtual. We're having these kind of connections literally in each other's homes, and having conversations that we've never had before when we shared the same, physical proximity. And then we get the green light, everybody back to work. We go back to work, and those conversations stop because
they recede.
Because we're not forced to have them in the same way.
Right.
So what you're saying is that there's going to be an adjustment period where people are going to have to come to terms with, wait a minute, what is it about that I really loved? And how do we continue that, ironically, without using the technology?
Exactly.
I mean, we want to continue it with the technology, but for people who are actually, together in physical proximity, how do we continue those kind of conversations now that we can, look down the hall and see each other there?
Yeah. When I walk in my neighborhood right now, everybody I see, I don't care if I've ever seen them before, if they drive by in their car, we wave. There's a solidarity that goes on, right?
Right.
In 3 months, is that going to continue? And we have to decide it is. People on my team have been more vulnerable because I'm seeing them in their house and they'll say to me, hey, Pat, with the door closed, I'm kind of struggling with some stuff in my family right now. Whereas they didn't go to work and come into my office and tell me that.
Right.
And I hope that we push forward to a new normal, not go back to the old normal.
Yeah. And from a leadership perspective, we need to facilitate that, right?
By being vulnerable ourselves.
Yeah. So
it's all about vulnerability.
Which again has always been true, right? This
totally.
is what I find so fascinating about these times is that it's bringing into sharper relief what has always been true. It's not that all of a sudden connection is important because we're all facing this challenge. It's not that all of a sudden love is important. It's not that all of a sudden authenticity is important. It's always been important. We're just now collectively experiencing what it feels like and how great it is on that regard. Again, not to, like you said before, not to diminish the whole tragic part of this scenario, but that continuing and even deepening of those kind of connections is really going to fall on leaders who will do that by example, but also look for opportunities to facilitate those kind of conversations happening in the course of the way we do business.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm a Christian, a person of faith, and I find that more people are open to thinking about their faith lives right now than they were in the past. And I think it's mostly because in the old world, we had far more distractions. And C.S. Lewis once wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters. I don't know if you ever heard of this, but it's really fascinating. It's a fiction book about the devil, and he's teaching this junior devil like how to get people to be miserable. And the guy's like, should I do all these terrible things? He goes, no, just keep them distracted. That'll be enough. And you know what I hope we don't do after this is over? Now, my kids play sports. My son just made all conference in his college lacrosse team today.
Nice.
I'm very happy. But their season's over now. But one of the things I love about what I hope happens, I love sports, but I hope we watch less of them when this comes back. I don't want to come home and say, oh, the Utah Jazz are playing the Phoenix Suns. Yeah, I could spend 90 minutes watching this. What the hell? That doesn't mean nothing. And a lot of people I know are watching less TV now, even though you'd think all we'd be doing is watching TV. A lot of people are like, it doesn't really satisfy me anymore. So I hope that many of the kind of shallow distractions, there's a place for them, but we were overindulging in things that left us hollow at the end.
Yeah.
And I hope when this comes back, we turn off the TV more and play games with our families more and talk more. And going in the future, I think every 3 months we should have a 1 week lockdown, like a virtual where we just all sit around and be with our families.
Yeah.
You know. So anyway,
maybe it'll be a self-imposed lockdown.
Yeah, it's about love, though. You're right. It's about love.
You know, the idea of not going to the office, just staying home, hanging out with your family, was something that many people really yearned to do, but felt that they would be judged harshly for doing that,
right?
By their peers or by their bosses or whatever. So maybe now we'll be more encouraging to each other to take the time to do that every so often.
Absolutely. And, you know, I have to tell you, I'm a reluctant convert to Zoom and to distance stuff, because in the past virtual teams, I was very hard on them because I think oftentimes we weren't nurturing these relationships. So you can't just be a virtual team and never be together. But what I've seen is that Zoom and all these tools are not meeting tools. They are social interaction tools.
Yes.
And in the future, if somebody says, hey, my daughter's kind of down today, I think I'm going to stay home, I'm like, that's fine. You could get just as much done. Now, if we never see them and don't get a chance to build those strong relationships, that's not good. But the world has changed. Hey, we have people here in the Bay Area who commute literally 2 hours each way every day, because that's the only way you can find an affordable house. It's like, I have an idea. Work from home until noon. Come into work and go home at 6:30, and you're going to have so much more time with your family.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to be a little bit more creative about that, and we're going to prioritize meaningful relationships over ceremoniously showing up just for social protocol.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny because I just had another flashback, because back in the mid 90s, you know, when you and I first met and I first started the Tom Peters Company, this idea of working from home was starting to catch on, right? And that was a long time ago. So we've been talking about it for a long time. Now, all of a sudden, bang, just like that, everybody has the experience of what that is. And everybody's seeing, wow, I am so productive here that maybe we should do this more, even when we don't, quote unquote, have to.
Yeah, and this necessity is the mother of invention, you know, they say, and you see how fast. I was not embracing virtual teams until I had to, and then I said, let's get awesome at this, and it's going to forever change the way we serve clients and interact with each other. In fact, I think I'm going to make my team stay at home some days just so I can see them, and I can see we have 2 with new babies, and we get to see them now. Right. We would go months and months and months and never see them. Now we're like, go get Ryder. We want to see him.
That's fantastic. All right, I want to shift gears here a little bit, because let's talk about books for a moment.
Okay.
So I want to talk about books generally, and then I want to talk about your most recent one a little bit. So the number of books that you have now written are?
I think it's 12. Depends how you count them. I wrote one, you know, I've written a book for church. I wrote a family book. I wrote a soft cover. So, but if you add them up, it's probably 12 or 13.
12. And the first one was The 5 Temptations of a CEO. Was that the first one?
Yes. The 5 Temptations.
By the way, I remember you sent me the manuscript for that when you were writing it.
No way.
You did. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's
I remember reading,
funny.
going like, damn, this is good.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You remember that?
So that, if you look at all of your business books,
Yep.
they've all been fables, as you like to call them,
All but
except
one.
for one.
Yeah.
Except for the advantage, right?
Yeah.
So same formula for me. All of my books have been fables or parables,
Yep.
except for one. I only have 4, but the same formula. All but one have been stories, have been narratives. So I'm just curious, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners. So I'm curious for this personally, and also on behalf of the folks listening to us. What is your process like for creating these wonderful stories that have such rich content?
Well, because I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs, process is not a word that comes into play very well for me,
What you mean?
So I guess, what does my lack of process look like, though? Is there some consistency to that? And I think it's this. First of all, I never thought I was going to write a bunch of books. The first one we wrote, we started our company, and at one of our first meetings, we said, hey, we should go to Kinko's and make copies of this and hand it out to our clients. And then Amy's brother's girlfriend's best friend was Susan Williams, who worked at Josie Bass.
Right.
And she read it reluctantly because Amy saw her at a Christmas party, and she was like, oh my gosh, we like this. And so I thought, hey, what do you know? They're going to print it. I thought that would just be cool that they print it. And so something else would come up, and I go, oh, well, that's an interesting. And somebody said, that's a book. And so many times during this process, I thought, I'm done. And then something comes up that makes me feel compelled. And oftentimes I say, I don't think it's a book. I think it's an article. And they're like, no, that's a book. And so anyway, I'm glad that other people push me to do things that I probably wouldn't have done myself. The process for me, though, is it starts with an idea, and I talk to my staff about it, and they're like, yeah, this is a book. And so I might write like a 2-paragraph summary of what it's about. But what's interesting, I think I probably start talking about, and this is not something I would recommend to others, but I start talking about the title and the cover, not because I'm going to decide on it, but if I don't have something I'm looking at when I'm writing, like this is what this is. Like some people start a business and what they want to do is they want to say, what are we going to call it? And it's like, no, don't do that, because everybody wants to do that. You're like, I'm going to make a movie. Who's going to star in it? No, just write a screenplay. But for me, I kind of need to know what this is going to look like when it's done. And then I start going, and it always changes. I mean, and it takes about 9 months for me to write a book now, but I don't write full time ever. I'll write for like 2 days at a time, and then I'll put it away. And then I'll be in the shower and a new idea will come to me. When they invent a whiteboard in the shower and a video conferencing that goes just above the waist, I'm going to get really
That's what this is.
Exactly. If only I were naked and covered with water. So my process is a pretty messy one. When I first started, I used to go to Napa and sit in a hotel for like 3 days. I'd usually go to the lobby of the hotel, though, and write like in the evening when people were kind of mingling, so I could kind of be distracted. But now what I do is I go over to this hotel that's about 2 miles from my home and another 2 miles from my office. And so I'll write for like 2 nights in a row, and then people will come over and we'll work on it. And then I'll come home and have dinner, and then my kids go to bed, and then I go back or whatever. So it's a very messy, inconsistent process, but it generally works out to about 9 months of off and on writing and a lot of discussion.
Yeah. So a lot of discussion with your team. You're not writing in a vacuum.
Never.
Bouncing the ideas off of people. They're challenging you on some things and encouraging on others, I'm imagining.
Yeah.
And so the format of your fables are you have the story, then you have the model at the end.
That's right.
Right? So where does it typically start for you? Does it start with the story and the characters and the arc? Because I know you like to write screenplays and all that too. You're a creative guy in that respect. Or does it start with the model and the ideas that you want to deliver through the story?
Oh, the model and the ideas. So I'll come home and I'll say, I remember I have a book called The Motive that just came out a while ago. Shameless plug, But here's how I've been asked this question a lot lately. Where did that come from? And I was in Palm Springs at a big Man at Leadership conference, and I was talking to like a group of 20 CEOs sitting around a living room in a big suite up in one of these rooms, and they were asking me questions, and I was puzzled by of a number of the CEOs who were just rejecting my advice out of hand. They were like, I would never do that. Why would I do that? And you would totally relate to this, because essentially they were saying, what does that give? What does that do for me?
Right.
That doesn't sound fun. And I remember saying to Karen, who you know, Karen Amador, who works with me, I remember saying to Karen, oh my gosh, Karen, those people are CEOs for the wrong reasons. They did it for themselves. And so then we get on the plane and we're flying back, and I'm like, oh, and she's like, that's pretty interesting. What do you think that is? Oh my gosh. And then I'm going through and saying, well, let me see. What's the right reason? What's the wrong reason? And by the time we get back to the office, the next day we go in and we go, hey, you guys, I was thinking about this. And Tracy, my editor, you know Tracy, she's now my editor. And I mean, she's a very involved editor. She's like, that's a book. And so then they'll go into the conference room and they say, Pat, write down the 5 things you think leaders who have the wrong motive do. Now write down the things that the right leaders do. What is this? What is this? And that's where it all starts. And so we get our hands around the model, but it's not perfect. And then I start writing the fiction, and through the characters, it kind of goes back and forth.
Okay.
So, and I have to say that I'm a fiction writer, but I'm really kind of a screenwriter, because I don't do very much detail. I've noticed this. It's almost all dialogue. And so when I read, I love, like, Dean Koontz is one of my favorite authors, and he, like, is beautiful the way he describes things and people. And mine is just like, Bob was the CEO. This is what was going on with him. Yeah. And then through their dialogue, you get to know them. Right. But I don't do a lot of description. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No, it's a great answer. You know, and I had another Lencioni.
I want to hear about yours. I remember the first one you wrote, the Radical Leap, and the surfer. Yeah. You were living in San Diego, and I remember you spent a lot of time down there. But what is your process like?
So that's funny you should ask, because that's my Lencioni flashback again. Was when I wrote that book and I gave you the manuscript for it.
I remember.
And asked you to read it. You were very encouraging, and you sent it to the editor at Josie Bass. Actually, you introduced me to Jim Levine, our agent, right? Yep. Who became my agent for that book.
Super agent, the best agent.
He started shopping it around, and he sent it to your contact at Josie Bass. She came back and said, "This is one of the greatest bits of rejection I ever got." She came back. Jim called me up, and he said, "Yeah, she just didn't like. She passed on it." He said. I said, "Well, what did she give you any feedback?" He said, "Yeah, she just didn't like anything about it." I said, "Really?" I said, how about the font?" He said, "Oh, no, the font was fine." I said, "Well, no, there you go. That's something."
And Jim, our agent, he's still your agent, right?
He is for the new book, yeah.
Yeah, Jim is we love Jim. He's like he's so earnest and just says things, the way they are. And it's so funny. That's a great story. It's a great story after you've done very successful books.
Yeah, which I hadn't at the time.
She just didn't like anything about it.
She just didn't like anything about it.
Oh,
yeah, so Jim is our agent. I'm working on this book with my friend JJ French, the founder of Twisted Sister. And Jim is the agent for that, because I introduced JJ to Jim, and then he repped us on that particular book.
Jim does a lot of eclectic stuff.
My new book is actually agented by somebody else, but yeah, I've worked with Jim for years, and in those formative days, my process is very different from yours. I tend to write in a vacuum, and I have the kernel of an idea. Like with the Radical Leap, leap is love, energy, audacity, and proof. That's the framework, right, which we've been teaching now for years with great results. But at the time, it was a conceptual thing that I wanted to flesh out, and it was actually the story and the dialogue between the characters in the story where that gave me an opportunity to really think it through and get clarity on it. So it's like there's a thought, and then it's, I wonder what I mean by that. And actually setting up the story of just a vague kind of story arc. Characters would kind of reveal themselves, and then they'd get into dialogue, and And that's where I got clarity on it. So my original plan for the Radical Leap was it was going to be just two characters, myself, because I narrate my own stories,
right,
and Edge, who's the main character, the surfer dude.
The surfer.
And it was just going to be the two of us. Kind of like My Dinner with Andre, if you remember that.
Yeah, oh yeah, I love that.
Just the dialogue, right? And just a way to kind of bounce ideas off of myself. And it worked. And in fact, there's one story that I've shared with a few folks over the years. The foundational thought behind my work is this phrase: do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. So doing what you love is the foundation, but you're using that to serve people. And you're serving people not just because you feel obliged to, but because you want to have an impact. And when you do have that impact, they reciprocate, they love you in return, and that's the full circle. So that line came to me when I was writing The Radical Leap, and I was involved in the characters to such a degree that it was consuming basically every aspect of my psyche.
Yeah. And it's hard to, you got to dive in there.
It's like getting to know these people.
Oh, goodness, yeah. Katharine Peterson, my main character, who's been in almost every one of my books in one way or another, but the main character in The 5 Dysfunctions, she's like a hero, and people talk about her, you know.
And does anybody ever come up to you and say, have you talked to Katharine lately?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've had people that read my books and thought they were not fiction. And
Yeah,
I said,
exactly.
no, they're made up.
Yeah, I know. It's like, people will say to me, I've heard this question a lot over the years. Hey, so how's Edge? It's like, okay, let's see. Do you want the good news or the bad news?
He's a meth addict now.
When's the last time you talked? That's
That's very dark humor, you know.
Exactly. Oh yeah, he's in rehab again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, hey, have you talked to Edge lately? It's like, well, how does all the time strike you?
Yeah.
And then it's a great compliment, right?
You know, Steve,
but anyway,
I wish I had a picture of my face when I was writing, because I know that and you and I have similar personality styles. I know that like when somebody's sad or somebody's happy or they're having dialogue, I know my face is betraying. I you know, nobody else is watching me write, but I know I get like animated about the characters.
Right, exactly. And you come up with a line or a paragraph, and you go, damn, that's really good. So what happened was, when I was writing Leap, very early one morning before I woke up, I was having a dream. I had a vivid dream. I still remember it vividly. I was taking a walk with Edge. We were just walking through a neighborhood. We were having a conversation. And I said, so Edge, this Leap thing and all that, just net it all out for me. What is it all about? And he said, do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. And I woke up. And thank goodness, maybe the first time in my life when I had a thought, you know how you have those thoughts, it's like, oh, I'll remember that.
Oh yeah.
I actually got out of bed and I wrote it down. And the next morning, or later on that morning, when I woke up for the day, I read that and was like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? and that it made it into the book. And of all the things that I've ever written and all the ideas that I've ever put out there, that's the one that gets quoted most often.
Oh yeah.
And that's the one that people come back to. So
you know why? Because it's just so darn true on its face that it's like, that's it right there.
But the process of it, that deep creative work is something that people don't often, attribute to somebody who's writing a business book. Right. So when I look at your books, I mean, there's this wonderful kind of combination of really, really challenging and important ideas with a simplicity in the story that makes it accessible to everybody. To the point where in the new book, The Motive, you kind of wrap it up with this wonderful thought about the end of servant leadership. Say a little bit about that.
Right. And I like to get people's attention when I say that, because they're like, what? But servant leadership is great. It's like, yeah, the problem is there is no leadership if you're not doing servant leadership. So by using that phrase, we imply that there's some other way to do it. It's like, he's a great leader. He's a very servant leader. It's like, what about, tell me somebody who's a great leader that's not a servant leader. So when we do that, I think we're giving implicit permission for people to be something else.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is that's the only kind of leadership there is.
I love that. And I'll be, as I always try to be, really blatantly honest as to one of the reasons I love that. It's so much my style, man.
Yeah.
It's so much my style. It's finding the phrase that's provocative in the way that it's said, and it reveals kind of an obvious truth underneath it. So the motive kind of does that. The whole point of view of the book is stating something that should be really freaking obvious.
Right.
But it's not until you hear it. And so let me summarize it and tell me if I have it right.
Okay.
And then I'd love for you to expand on it a little bit. So there's this old question, that we always played around with: are leaders born or are they made? And the answer to that question, of course, is yes. I've never yet met a leader who's not born. So apparently that's a prerequisite.
Yeah.
But that's an old Jim Kouzes line, by the way, that I just completely ripped off. But the question,
good old Jim. That's great.
The question, are leaders made is really the point of debate. Some people just kind of, naturally have it, and other people, for the rest of us, there's no hope. And obviously, for people in the kind of work that we do, there's a belief that leaders can be made. We can all get better at it if we pay attention to it and study it. There is such a thing as a born leader, just like there's such a thing as a born athlete or a born musician, whatever. But
what they do with it is what matters. I mean, right. Hitler may have been a born leader,
Right, exactly. So the moral context is, comes into play, and
right.
and all of that. So yes, we can all get better at it. But the question that you pose in the motive, if I have it right, isn't so much can leaders learn how to lead? It's should they?
Right.
In other words, there are some people who maybe shouldn't go down that path to begin with.
Right.
That's kind of my take on the gestalt of the thing, if that's the right word to use. So am I in the right ballpark with that?
You're absolutely right. And along the lines of what you said about saying that thing that provokes people. So I spoke at a leadership conference last summer. It's a big leadership conference called the Willow Creek Leadership, the World Leadership Summit, Global Leadership Summit, GLS. And what I said at the beginning, their theme was everyone's a leader or something like that. And I stood up and said, well, I hate to say this, but I think we should have fewer leaders in society than more. And they were like, why? And I said, because if you're not leading for the right reasons, it's really dangerous. And I talked about how I hate going to graduations where they say, go out and be a leader. Yeah, you guys are leaders. You're going to lead the world. And it's like, no, if you're doing it for yourself because you want to be cool and be seen as a leader or have power or fun or authority, please don't do it. Unless you sign up for the very bad personal economics of leadership, which is I'm going to give a heck of a lot more than I'll ever get back.
Yeah.
Then it's better that you don't do that.
Right.
And it's really great when some CEOs read that and go, hey, half of me is not doing it for the right reasons. And this was a real wake-up call and a real shock to my system.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I want people to do, is kind of really think about their motive. What is the reason that I'm doing this? And too many of us do it for the wrong reason, and it hurts people. So.
And there are people who will hear that idea and read it and get it intellectually. And the conclusion that they'll come to is, from now on, I have to pretend that I'm doing this for the right reasons.
Well, that's the beauty of, okay, so if you are, we go through 5 activities. We say that being a leader, being a CEO, for instance, is a verb, not a noun. It shouldn't be called a chief executive officer. That's a title. It should be the chief executing officer. Mm-hmm. You have to do things. And here's 5 things. And if you think you can fake it, okay, but here's the 5 things. And they're not pleasant. And I actually want people to go, oh, not only do I not do it for the right reasons, but I don't even want to fake that because it's really tedious or unpleasant or uncomfortable.
Right.
See, because you're exactly right. People could fake it. They could go, well, I'll just go to me. I'll pretend like I care. Okay, were you willing to care enough to have really difficult conversations with people? Were you willing to care enough to tell people things that are going to make you feel really bad, but it's in their best interest. And we get into love. Like, are you going to love on that person even if you don't like them at that moment? And a lot of leaders are like, I don't want to do that. It's like, yeah, that means you don't want to be a leader.
Yeah.
So we until you get it down to the verb of it, it's one thing to say your motive could be wrong, and then people will try to fake it. But it's like, okay, it's kind of like saying this. It's kind of like saying, and this is a book I want to write someday about parenting. Not even a book. I just want to put something out. I say to people, do you love your kids? And everyone says they do. And I actually believe them. They do, I think. But then I say, okay, but if you love your kids, here's the verbs. And there's 3 verbs to love your kids. You have to spend time with them. You have to discipline them, and you have to show them affection. Some people are like, oh yeah, I love my kids. I love the idea of having kids. They're an accoutrement and it's a nice thing, but I don't really want to do those 3 things. And it's like, then you don't want to be a parent.
Yeah.
Because see, it's a verb. And so when you break it down into the verbs, it allows people to be a little bit more honest with themselves about, because that's what I've had CEOs read this and said, I hate running meetings. I hate giving people difficult information. I really hate, the next one that I think of, repeating myself, because I think that's boring. And I don't really
over communicate to get your idea across.
Yeah. And they go, yeah, I don't like those things. And then they say, shit. Oops, sorry. Did I say that?
No, you could say it again if you'd like.
But they say, maybe I shouldn't be a leader. That is when it becomes real.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, though, say, I don't like doing it. And that's a sign that I've been leading for the wrong reason. And I'm going to start leading for the right reason. Because I think people have the capacity to become great leaders if they're honest with themselves and vulnerable enough to admit they've done it wrong. Because, hey, Steve, in my career, I've had years where I was doing it mostly for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
And my people suffered.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
You know, it reminded me of one of the things that I see happen in the culture work that we do. There are executives, so-called leaders, who will say, we would like our culture to be more, whatever it is, XYZ. We want our culture to be more supportive. We want more collaboration. We want more innovation. We want to raise the level of our client service. We want to do all these things. And then when the discussion comes down to, okay, great. Now, these are the verbs for you. These are the things that you need to start doing differently in order to make that culture happen, versus the original intent for some of these folks is, who can I delegate this to, right?
Right.
Which is one of the stopgaps in your model, is that you can't, there's no delegating these things, these particular things allowed, right? So that you get this resistance, and this is the way I characterize the resistance when it comes down to that. This is essentially what these people are saying. You ready?
Yeah.
I don't wanna.
Exactly.
You can't make me. It's incredibly childish. It's this idea that I'm the boss. I got here by not doing any of these things. So why are you asking? Why should I change? So yeah. I guess there's a question in here, Pat, which is, I'm in a position of authority. I am the CEO. I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to do those things. So, neener. What do you do? What can the people? Let me frame it this way. The greatest frustration with somebody like that are the people that work for him or her.
Oh,
so what advice do you find yourself giving to folks who are just faced with that impasse?
Well, I think what you do then is you can say, and I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head, but here's when you abdicate, because they say they delegate, which essentially they abdicate.
Yeah.
They're picking and choosing what they want to work on. You know, I was the head of marketing for 20 years. Now I'm the CEO. I'm essentially going to be the head of marketing with a nicer title, and I'm going to focus on the things I like to do. And it's like, no, you're now the CEO. You have to let somebody else do that job. This is a totally different job. And they go, well, I don't want to. And then I say this, okay, here's the thing. Because you have that job, nobody else can do these things because they don't have the authority. And here's what happens when you don't do them. And we talk about dysfunction and politics and people getting discouraged and good people quitting. And when I lay out the pain, the very human pain and the organizational pain that they cause as a result of abdicating, that's when that middle third of leaders they don't want to, but maybe they're willing to, will wake up. Then there's that other third that are just like, I don't really care.
Right.
I'll let them suffer. And if they're indifferent to the suffering of others, then they're going to continue to occupy that job and do it that way. But I think that there's some that want to be servant leaders. They're like, this is my job. It's a burden and it's a duty, and I'm going to do it. There's some in the middle are like, well, I see a lot of other people having fun and picking and choosing what they work on. And then there's the ones that go, damn right, I'm going to do this because it's my privilege. Yeah. Well, I think there's those ones in the middle when you call out the pain they're causing to others are like, I just can't do that.
So you've found a way to kind of lay out the evidence as to why somebody who's resistant to this should consider a shift in their motive.
Yes.
When you lay out all those pain points, which is really helpful for me, and I'll tell you why. One of the conclusions that I've come to I'll speak for myself. It may be true for many people, but for me, what I've realized is that I'm really not in the business of convincing anybody of anything. That really what I'm in is the confirmation business. In other words, it's those people in one of those categories that you just mentioned that they already get it, but they haven't heard it framed up that way. And when they do, they're like, oh man, that's right. That's the instinct that I've always had. That's the impulse that I've always had, but I didn't pay attention to it for whatever reason, maybe even because I thought that it was wrong, that you're not supposed to do that because of all the so-called role models that I've had. None of them emulated this. So I thought these feelings that I had that you should connect with people and be honest with people and be, all these wonderful attributes didn't have any place in business. And now you come along and say, oh no, they not only do they have a place in business, that's the way you're supposed to do it. And then it's all the lights go on. I haven't really changed my DNA. I'm just now more emboldened to be who I always was, but in a bigger way.
That's right. St. Augustine was a 5th century saint who said, there's a hole in everybody's heart that can only be filled with God. You can't convince somebody of something. You just help them see that. And then they go, oh yeah, I can see that, And when I write, I'm not trying to prove it. I'm just saying, this is what I see. And you know how many people come to me? I think my favorite compliment I get, Steve, about my books is people go, oh my gosh, I knew that. Yes. What you wrote, I knew that. I always thought that. But nobody articulated it that way so I could get it. And so Samuel Johnson once said, the writer, I think he was the 18th century, 17th century maybe. And he said, people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. And I'm convinced that I'm just reminding people of things that they already know. Maybe that they've forgotten or gotten distracted from, but that's all we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And what's beautiful about that is it's so powerful because it creates, I'm not going to say it creates great momentum, but it appears to, because what happens is people get so excited by that revelation that they have for themselves.
Yeah.
They just go headlong in and embrace it full bore. And it can appear to others that this person has gone through some miraculous transformation when really all they've done is acted in a way that they've always felt they wanted to anyhow.
Something, Steve, we were talking about something before we started. Terry Pierce, who's a colleague of yours, and I knew Terry very well for a while years ago, and he passed away, God rest his soul, within this past year. And he wrote a book called Leading Out Loud. And one of the things Terry talked about in that book, and this has impacted me in my career so much in the way I write and the way I speak and the way I consult, and that is anticipate people's objections. And when I write my books, you know what I do? And the reason why I write fiction is because so I can actually, through my characters, be the people reading it and go, I know you think this. I know you're probably thinking this. And the characters represent the people reading it. And they're like, oh yeah, that character said exactly what I was thinking. And we take away, if I wrote a pure prose book that was just like, here's what I think, you should do this. Well, then they're going to be like, you're just preaching to me.
Right.
but I actually draw them out. And in the book, The Motive, the most powerful moment in the book is when, and I think this is some of the best fiction I've written, or the most edgy fiction. One of the characters says, do you know how I screwed up my life and my company's life before, and how I learned this the hard way? And that's when we learn, is when somebody says, oh, don't take my word for this because I'm great.
Right.
Take my word for it because I've suffered and I've learned.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and when I talk to people, like, I've led for the wrong reason and it caused hurt in the people I work for. That's when people go, oh, wait, tell me more about that now.
Right.
Because I don't come into these books thinking I'm a great leader and I get this naturally. It's like, no, I've learned this the hard way, and I prefer you not have to.
Yeah, of course. And that's well said. And the reason is because it is part of the human experience.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned from Terry, who, I consider to be a really significant mentor for me, and I miss him. But one of the things that I learned from him is the power. And again, this was way before Brene Brown made this part of our international conversation. But one of the most powerful ways to connect with somebody as a leader, of course, as a human being in general, but as a leader, is through our vulnerability.
Yep.
And the reason is that we are all flawed. And as opposed to saying, as a leader, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that I appear to be flawless, that I appear to be the person who's got it all figured out, the smartest person in the room, et cetera. Ironically, if I'm really good at that, I'm automatically suspect because everybody knows there's no such thing. So instead, just to say, here's where I screwed up. Here's what I learned from it. I'm sharing that with you in the hopes that you'll identify with it and maybe not make the same mistake that I did. And the bonus to that is now you and I are more connected more deeply because we're connecting human to human.
Yep. That's the beginning of everything we do at the Table Group with clients is, we help them build healthy organizations, better teams, get clarity, communicate, all these different things, build cultures, have better meetings, all that. But it starts with the leader. Are you willing to be vulnerable with your team? Because if you're not, you can't build the kind of trust where you can actually make the team good and make good decisions. And I'm going to tell you something, Steve. Yesterday, I got into an appropriate shouting match with my 17-year-old son, a great kid, Casey. And when we settled down, it came down to this: Casey, you need to be more vulnerable. You need to admit when you need help, because you don't ask for help because you think you have to prove yourself, and it causes pain for you. Right. And it leaves others wondering what you're thinking. It was so great to be able to talk about vulnerability. And I said, and again, St. Paul said, I am strongest when I'm weak. And that's one of those counterintuitive, countercultural things that's at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't mean you come to work every day and you go, hey, I suck at this. I suck at this too. Made another mistake. I screwed that up. Then you have a competence problem.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
But you got to admit it when you do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, that's a fitting way to bring our conversation in for a landing. Before I let you go, you mentioned, obviously you mentioned the new book, The Motive. You mentioned the Table Group. What's the best way for people to connect with you and your work and your team and all of that?
Yeah, go to our website, www.tablegroup.com. And there's all kinds of free resources and other stuff. And we're launching new things right now in this time. One of the things we launched with like a week's notice rather than 6 months we'd planned to is we actually, Steve, created a new a community for consultants who do any work around teams and organizations, whether it's HR, whether an independent consultant, whether they work in or OD at a company, or even if they're a leader who sees themselves in a consulting role. And we actually just launched this, and thousands of people came on board, and we're just trying to help them and pour into them because the world needs good consultants to speak into leaders right now. And so we call it CAPA, the Consulting and Practitioner Alliance. And if you go to our website, you can see we do webinars, we put out information. We want to pull together all the wonderful practitioners in the world and help them be better at what they do because the world needs it. That's probably the biggest thing. We also have a podcast, which we do, which is fun. And but everything that they might be interested in is on our website, and we don't try to monetize everything. We try to give away as much as we can.
Yeah, that's great. No surprise there. All right, my friend, this has been
what a blast
conversation. Such a blast.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for showing up in the way that you always do. And, when the time of physical distancing is over, when we're free to move about the cabin, I really need to come on up there and visit you guys in person.
Oh, please. And when I do, I will not shake your hand. I will hug you. We have to stop shaking hands and hug more.
That's a great idea. It's a much more efficient way to pass a virus. Oh, no. I see what you mean. I agree, man. I am a dedicated hugger.
Yeah. Hugging's okay. I think we get diseases from shaking hands more. And so anyway, I'll look forward to that hug, Steve. I really appreciate this. This has been a blast. Your people must love listening to these because this is so much fun to be part of.
Well, thank you for showing up so fully like you always do, man. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless you, buddy.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Love is Just Damn Good Business with Steve Farber. Join us again next time, because when customer and employee satisfaction just isn't enough anymore, we are here to back you up with specific ideas to operationalize love to make an enormous difference in your business, personal life, and the world around you. Visit our website at stevefarber.com to leave a review. And don't forget to share the love with your colleagues and friends, because after all, it's just damn good business.